So if I'm currently a self-published songwriter,
Mhm.
signed up with the MLC, I did my connect to collect, and
Yes. I love it.
and now I sign a major publishing deal
Yep.
with a large publishing company. Now what? Do I have to do
Um,
anything?
yeah, no problem. First of all, one of the many benefits to registering with the MLC as a self-published or self-administered songwriter is if you then do a publishing deal, and if you have registered all your existing songs and gotten them set up with us, you've essentially done a whole lot of preparation
Mm.
for that publishing deal. And now when you're talking with a publisher and they're asking you questions like, so how many songs have you written that are commercially released? You can say, I know exactly how many because I've registered them all with the MLC. All the data is there. And that will make you that much more appealing to the publisher
Mhm.
because they now don't have to go back and clean up all of that stuff, right? So what you're really doing is you're acting like a professional.
This week's episode is quite a special one. We have the CEO of the MLC and with Kris Ahrend. So, Kris is the CEO of the MLC. And if you've been listening to previous episodes of The Vana Room, Rob and Monique and I have been talking pretty much relentlessly about the MLC and how it's kind of changing the structure of royalties and all that stuff. Another thing to sign up to in the music industry, as we love to say. So I don't want to take too much time. It doesn't really need much of an introduction. I want to kind of kick it over to Kris to maybe briefly introduce himself and the MLC, and then we'll get started with a whole host of questions for him. So, Kris, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, Lennon, thanks so much for having me. And Monique and Rob, great to be here with the two of you as well. And I'm really excited to talk a bit more about the MLC with your audience. Thrilled to know that you've been talking about us already. As your audience probably knows, the MLC is a relatively new rights management organization in the music industry. We work on the publishing side of the business, and we specifically administer and distribute a set of royalties that go to publishers or songwriters who act as their own publishers. And we call them self-administered songwriters. And those royalties relate to uses of songs by digital audio services in the US. So think specifically the interactive streaming services like Spotify, Apple, Amazon, and a host of others. Those are the folks that get the blanket license from us that we administer. We collect royalties from them, the mechanical royalties, and then we distribute those to the folks that are entitled to receive them.
Cool. Great. That's very simple, but yet complex at the same time. And I know, Monique, you've got a lot of questions that you want to get going. So I know you're just drooling, ready to ask some
I
questions.
took
So
it
I'll kick it
easy.
over.
So, yeah, I'm not going to hog it up. But yes, I'm sitting here like, oh, I can't wait. I'm chomping at the bit over here. Kris, so nice to meet you. Thank you so much for being here and taking time out of your busy day to do this with us. And I do want to say this as we continue this conversation, because a lot of our viewers are people who are new to the industry. And so I want to remind them of previous podcast episodes where Lennon and I have talked about the different copyrights. There's the musical work copyright, and then there's the sound recording. The MLC is specifically for the musical work, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so
And
you
that's
guys
a
don't do
really
anything with
important
the recording.
distinction.
Yeah.
That's correct, right? Because first things first, as a creator, especially because so many creators both write the songs and then perform and record them, you need to know which side of that divide you're talking about. We're on the song side or the musical work side.
Right. And so before I get into your whole process, I want to ask this question. Other services require a fee. The MLC is free. So how does the MLC get paid? Where does your funding come from?
Yeah, great question. So one of the hallmarks of everything that we do is that the MLC was created when creator organizations advocated for a change in the law,
Mhm.
and so in the course of advocating for changes in the law that led to the creation of the MLC, one of the things they did was push to have the MLC funded separately by the digital services that operate under the blanket license we administer.
Oh.
So unlike every other collective management organization in the world, we do not deduct an administration fee from the royalties we collect that essentially would come out of the royalties a creator would be entitled to receive from us to pay for our operations, our employees, our technology. All of our operating costs are separately funded by the digital services, and that's a requirement of the law that led to our creation, the Music Modernization Act. So kudos to any of you out there who were advocates a few years back. It was thanks to your advocacy that the MMA, as passed, requires the digital services to pay for the MLC's operating costs. And that's how we can do everything we do for you creators for free.
And you also had another big win recently where the DSPs tried to appeal the increase that's about to start. And so the courts upheld their decision for that increase. So, congratulations on that for what you guys do for the songwriters, for sure.
Well, to be clear, that was certainly a positive outcome for rights holders, but the MLC was not directly involved in that.
Right.
We're not allowed to
pick a
advocate
side
or lobby. Exactly, because one of the, another important aspect of what we do, we essentially act as an intermediary, making it easier for those digital services to fulfill their legal obligations to report and account. And then on the other side, to pay that money to the rights holders. So because we sit in the middle of the process, the law doesn't allow us to participate as an advocate for either side, which is good. But certainly the recent announcement that the CRB, the organization that ultimately decides what the rates will be, their recent announcement that they're going to maintain the higher percentages that they initially decided for rights holders is a win for rights holders. So again, congratulations to advocates, who were seeking that result. It is certainly your win. And our job now is to make sure that when those rates become effective, and they are not yet effective,
right?
But when they become effective, to collect and receive the data and the money at those higher rates, and then to pass that on to rights holders.
Now, a new blanket license that you guys are collecting for, this replaced the previous compulsory license that existed under the copyright law, correct?
Correct. So you, as a user, you could have used the songs in the old regime, but you were responsible for administering those rights, and that meant that digital services either had to build that ability themselves, or they had to hire a vendor. And there were a handful of vendors that did that. Now, under the blanket license, all of the activity, the reporting and the royalties under the blanket get paid to us, the MLC. So it's a single administrator. And then we act as a clearinghouse, collect all those royalties, figure out who gets what, and then we distribute all of those to our members. So what's really nice for any rights holder is you could receive from the MLC now royalties from upwards of 40 or more digital services that operate under the blanket. And you get all the royalties from one organization at one time. All your statements come from one place. All your payments come from one place. And the format is all the same. So it makes it a lot easier for you as a rights holder to receive all that information than it would have been had you been dealing separately with 40 DSPs or 40 DSPs and their vendors. And that's how it worked in the old system.
When the MLC launched, you guys really hit the ground running. I mean, you were there for the songwriters. And I actually had a student ask me this question, which is, because I was showing them an article about how much money you guys collected within the first, I can't remember if it was like the first year, the first few months, it was like $424 million. Where was that money? Like where was it sitting all this time that you were able to get your hands on it to distribute it?
So the 424 million that your student asked about represented historical unmatched royalties that digital services had accrued but had not paid, presumably because they didn't know who to pay or how to reach those people if they knew who they were. And the law allowed them to transfer those royalties to the MLC by February 15th of 2021, and then essentially hand over responsibility to the MLC to match and pay those royalties out. If they did that and fulfilled other requirements under the law, they would potentially be able to claim the benefit of a limit on liability that protected them from claims against their failure to pay those royalties in the past. So that money was all of the historical royalties, and it was required to be delivered to us in February of last year, though the services had another 6 months to deliver some of the data. So we got some of the data at the same time. Some of the data came toward the summer, and all of that is now what we have begun processing and paying out. We actually paid out our first set of matched historical royalties in June. Our second set of matched historical royalties will go out 2 days from now on June 14th. But what was interesting about that is that was not the first thing that we dealt with. So at the same time that we got all that money for historical uses, we also started getting the reporting from digital services for their January 2021 usage, the first month of usage that was covered by the blanket. And it's those blanket royalties that we actually started paying out first, because the law required us to get that process up and running immediately. So in April of last year, we paid out our first monthly distribution of blanket royalties. We have done that every month since then, on time or early. And we have now distributed more than $500 million in blanket royalties. So we've actually distributed more in blanket royalties than we received for the historical royalties. And we have begun now to also distribute the historical royalties. So just between those two things alone, we're talking about $1 billion in royalties and counting. So it's quite a bit of money. And,
it is.
And all that happened, as you said, in a really short period of time.
Yeah. Job well done, I have to say.
Yeah.
Can you make the distinction about, okay, so what the MLC does is the blanket mechanical.
Mm-hmm.
If someone or let me change my example. If I cover a Shaka Khan song, okay, so I release a Shaka Khan song, I have to pay what's called a mechanical statutory rate for me covering that song. Mm-hmm. Does the MLC collect that as well?
Great question. If it is a true cover, meaning if under the law you essentially record that song that was previously recorded by someone else, so the first use right has been granted and exercised, because again, as an aside, if I write a song, I have the right under the law to determine who gets to record and release it commercially for the first time. But if we picked "I Feel for You," right, great classic Shaka Khan song, she recorded that years ago. It's been released. Anyone else now can record their own performance of that song, right. And as long as that performance doesn't materially change the composition, meaning you don't add a bunch of words or change the melody completely or reorder things, simply performing a new version of that song is something that you can do that would be covered by the blanket license. Mm-hmm. But if you decided to rewrite the song completely, that rewrite would constitute a derivative work. And now you need to go back to the original songwriters and get their permission. And if you don't get their permission, they can object to your recording of that, mm-hmm. and prevent that from being covered under the blanket. I mean, it isn't legally covered, but they can essentially flag that and get that recording taken down. So what we say is, for most people, if you're simply performing the song as it was originally recorded, right. And that happens all the time, the blanket will cover that, and we handle that the way we would any other use of a song. But if you're creating a derivative work, you need permission. And if you don't get that permission, then that derivative work or that derivative use will not be covered by the blanket.
And then at that point, I'm responsible for taking whatever royalties came to me and paying it directly to their publisher, correct?
Well, if you did that derivative deal with them, and it was now an approved use, essentially
Right.
you'd register a new composition for that derivative composition, and that could get processed under the blanket license. So it all depends on whether
Oh.
the use was approved or not. Essentially,
Oh.
the blanket license covers approved uses of songs, but it doesn't cover non-approved or infringing uses. So if you do something that under the law you're not allowed to do, you can't just throw it out in the world and then expect that it's fine and the blanket will cover it. So that's the key. But again, you're going to have that conversation to clear it with the owner of the song, and they'll then once it's approved, presumably that it would get picked up by the blanket because that's how they want to be paid.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have a follow-up question for that.
Okay.
I know.
And remember, Monique, and your students, this is important. We just talked about how it works for the digital audio uses.
Right.
But in this day and age, it's rare that someone records a song and doesn't also put it up on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, the visual portion of YouTube. And all of those uses have to be handled separately. The blanket license we administer doesn't cover any video uses.
Ooh.
And anytime you use a song in a video, you've got to get permission.
Right.
So from the original songwriter. So
Right.
so that derivative conversation is in all likelihood going to get wrapped up in other conversations that you'd have to have for the video rights. And that again is why it's important to understand how this works. Music is complicated, and you want to make sure you understand the legal consequences of the thing you do before the fact, not after the fact.
So you guys are just strictly digital distribution from a DSP perspective.
And it's audio only.
Audio only.
Audio only.
No sync licenses, nothing like that. Okay, good.
No sync licenses. Under the law, rights holders, songwriters, and publishers retain the right to approve or deny any sync use in their sole discretion.
Right.
So every sync use is ultimately a negotiation.
Yep. So if I'm currently a self-published songwriter, signed up with the MLC, I did my connect to collect, and
I love it.
And now I sign a major publishing deal with a large publishing company. Now what? Do I have to do anything?
Yeah, no problem. First of all, one of the many benefits to registering with the MLC as a self-published or self-administered songwriter is if you then do a publishing deal, and if you have registered all your existing songs and gotten them set up with us, you've essentially done a whole lot of preparation for that publishing deal. And now when you're talking with a publisher and they're asking you questions like, so how many songs have you written that are commercially released? You can say, I know exactly how many because I've registered them all with the MLC. All the data is there. And that will make you that much more appealing to the publisher because they now don't have to go back and clean up all of that stuff, right? So what you're really doing is you're acting like a professional and representing yourself as a professional in ways that will make you more appealing to publishers who by and large are looking to hire professional songwriters, right? Or they're looking to hire aspiring songwriters who are ready to become professionals. So once that happens, you or they simply need to notify us, and then our team can help essentially move all of your registrations to your publisher so that they don't have to start from scratch and re-enter all the data. So again, we can handle that. Call our support team, or your publisher can call their publisher relations contact and let us know the details of who they're signing. We can then work with them to quickly look up the works, and then we can help transfer all of those registrations over, or at least your registrations for your shares of the works to your new publisher.
Okay, because that was you kind of answered what I was about to ask next, but I'm going to ask the question anyway for anybody who's watching who may have this question. Let's suppose Lennon, Rob, and myself collaborate on a song. Lennon and I are self-published, but Rob actually has a publishing deal. Do Lennon and I still submit? Do we submit? Do only one of us submit? Do both of us submit? How does that work? Because one of the three writers actually has a larger publishing company. So, well, how do we do that?
Yes, great question. So the way that registration works, um, each of you has to claim your share of the work. So if you were each equal writers on the work, you would each register 33 and a third percent. Now, if Lennon was first out of the gate and he registered his share of the song, some of the information about that song will be in our database. And he could have also said, hey, my co-writers were Rob and Monique. So your names could already be in the database for that registration. When you, Monique, or your publisher, Rob, go to register their work, one of the things that we prompt you to do, if you use our online registration process in the portal, or if your publisher submits a file, we look to see if there's already an existing registration for that same song. Because what we don't want is to essentially create three separate registrations for each share, right? Ultimately, we want one registration that has all of your shares in it. So we'll prompt you to search the existing database for the song and hopefully to find the registration that Lennon started. And then at that point, what you're really doing is saying, oh yeah, that's the same song. I just need to register my third share of it, one third share of it. So it's really, the difference is how much data you have to enter. If you're the first one to register the song, you have to enter all the information. If you're second or third in this example, then you may not need to add or submit all the information because some of it will already be there, right? The name of the song will be there because Lennon already registered the name of the song. Does that make sense?
Yes. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Good. That's, well, I was just saying quickly, that's why it's always good to coordinate too, right? Because if you've co-written, you are essentially partners in that song, right? Think of that song as a mini business. And the three of you were not just creative partners, you're now business partners. So it's always good to do things like, for example, exchange your writer names. Lennon might be that might be Lennon's legal name, but when he writes under his first and his middle name. And if Lennon was named after the Beatles, maybe his full name is Lennon McCartney. So you want to make sure you know what your co-writers, the name that they use when they write. And then, talk about that. Hey, I'm going to go register tomorrow. So just FYI, when you go to register next week, the song may already be in there, right? And that coordination just helps ensure that the process goes smoothly. You don't have to do it, but the more you can do that, the better, because your goal and ours are the same. At the end of the day, we want one registration for that song, and we want all three of your shares accurately reflected on that one registration.
Yeah.
So knowing that, right, anything you can do to help put those pieces together properly will ensure you all get paid properly.
Yeah. I have a question.
Lennon.
I have a couple questions. So, the second one is kind of a statement, but the first question is, when I distribute my song, so Jamvana is a music distributor. We get our songs up and available onto Spotify, Apple Music, and all those things. So does that data automatically get sent to the MLC, or is it something where after I release or before I release my song, I need to go to the MLC and enter all of the metadata associated with that song?
Great question, Lennon. So the answer is no. Yes, we get data from the DSPs, but the way to think about it is the data that we receive from DSPs is the data that was submitted with the sound recording. Now, one of the most important things that you can do if you're a creator who performs and writes your own material, make sure that you put your writer information in the metadata that your distributor, in this case Jamvana, asks you to submit with the sound recording. When that data then gets to Apple, to use one example, and your song is streamed on Apple's streaming service, Apple will report to us all the data for those streams, and that data will include the writer information that you submitted through Jamvana to Apple with the sound recording. Now, on our end, you should have also registered your song with the MLC, because again, on our end, what you're doing is saying, as a songwriter, I own a third, or I'm entitled to receive a third of the royalties for this song, using that same example that you, Monique, and Rob co-wrote that song together. By submitting your writer information in your song registration and also putting your writer name in your sound recording data, your writer name is now in both sides. It's on the sound recording side and it's on the song side in our database. Why do you think that's important? That's how we make the connection. That's how we know that when you submitted that performance that you or your band recorded, that it features the song that you, Monique, and Rob wrote. And what often happens, especially for creators, independent creators who use the independent distributors, if they leave that writer field blank, we now have the song information for them. I'm sorry, the sound recording information, but we don't know who wrote the song. Now, that would be fine if, to go back to Monique's example, you covered a Shaka Khan song, because we might have a good shot at matching your sound recording data to that, maybe. But if you wrote the song and the only person who ever recorded it was you, that's a much harder connection for us to make, right? Mm-hmm. So again, your submission of your writer name with the sound recording is really important, because that's the kind of key that we then receive that allows us to connect that use back to you as a writer. I would add, if you cover that Shaka Khan song, and I don't know offhand who wrote that song, if you can also include the writers of that cover song, that helps us to make that connection with those writers too. And that's important, because think about it, if you did write that song, right? Obviously, Shaka Khan's version gets streamed a ton. But there are a lot of people who are going to record that song because it's really popular. And those writers are just entitled to receive mechanicals when your version of that song gets streamed, as they are when Shaka Khan's version gets streamed. So you owe it to them to list them as the writers, so that they get paid when your cover gets streamed, in the same way that any other version of that song gets recorded. Those covers don't mean you're off the hook. You still want to make sure you submit the writer information. So again, Beatles, great example. So many people cover Beatles songs, right? And we love the Beatles. Don't just honor them by recording their song. Honor them by listing Lennon and McCartney, if it was a Lennon McCartney composition, as the writers. And that's going to ensure that not only do people hear your version of the song, but John and John's estate and Paul, sorry, I tripped there with the wrong order. They actually receive a little bit of the royalties too, right? Yeah. And what a great thing to think. I actually helped, give them a little bit of songwriting royalties. They deserve it. They were among the greatest. And that's a nice thing to do. Third benefit is the metadata, right? People might search for Beatles covers, and the DSPs are constantly adding more and more data to the search algorithms. If you do a great cover of that Lennon McCartney song, you want people to find it. And they may not know you, but they'll search for Lennon and McCartney covers. And it could be that that's the difference now, because you included that metadata for John Lennon and Paul McCartney. That's what allows you to be discovered in the search. So we also talk about how data doesn't just drive dollars for you as a writer, it drives discovery. So even when you're not the songwriter, the data can help people discover your sound recordings, and that's important. So I give you a long answer to your question. Now I'll let you either ask a follow-up, Lennon, or you had a statement you wanted to offer.
Yeah, that's a really good information, because Monique and I and Rob, we did an episode on metadata specifically. We went through Jamvana's back end, and we literally went through every field of metadata and explained what it is and why it's important. So that was kind of my next question is, how are you matching up all of the data, and what data are you specifically using? But you kind of answered that. So, and I want to, kind of go back and reiterate how important this metadata is for these types of things. It is so crucial on, it's almost more important than the actual music.
Absolutely. And I'll give you some numbers that help people understand exactly how important it is.
Wonderful.
The largest streaming services now claim to have more than 80 million sound recordings available.
Wow.
Our database has 27 million unique registrations for songs and growing. So what we do every month is we look at all the uses of upwards of 80 million sound recordings. And for each one, we have to figure out what is the song that was featured in that recording? And is it registered in our database? Then we have to find it. So put that in perspective. 80 million is roughly the population of a country like Germany or Thailand. Your songs, there's a great expression Dolly Parton used, my songs are like children. I expect them to support me when I'm old. Love that quote, right?
I love Dolly.
But if you think about your songs like kids, what do we know about kids, right? Kids have a limited ability to communicate information. Your songs are even worse than kids because your songs don't talk. So the only things your songs do is they can share the metadata you attach to them. But if you submit your sound recording of a song you wrote and you have no metadata at all, it's akin to you sending something or someone that can't talk to a foreign country and then expecting that somehow they're going to make it back on their own. So would you drop your 5-year-old kid off in the middle of Germany and then fly home and then expect to see them at your door a day later? Yeah. No, of course not, because they can't tell the people that find them how to find their way back. Your metadata is the set of instructions. It's the information that allows us to get the money that your song generates when it's streamed back to you. And again, if you don't appreciate the magnitude, that's a good metaphor. It's like sending a kid to a large foreign country without any instructions, any directions, and expecting that they're going to find their way back to your house wherever you live in the States. Yep. You wouldn't do that. And it should terrify you just as much as a creator if you send your stuff out in the world without all the metadata possible.
It terrifies Dolly Parton. It should terrify you.
But the good news is if you do all of that, right, then you will get paid and your songs will support you when you're old. Right. And that's the key. We want you to get paid everything you're due. And there are lots of organizations around the world that want that. But the struggle that every organization has is making those connections. And the way they do it is through the metadata. So I'm thrilled to hear that you've done this in a podcast. I would recommend everyone listening go back and listen to that podcast and know that the metadata isn't just some other thing. It's the thing.
So, Kris, one of the things I wanted to do was give you and your team at the MLC a major kudos for your website, the MLC.com. It is a very easy to maneuver, very user-friendly, lots of information. I'm also an educator, so the educator toolkit is fantastic. So I just would like you to share that with your team that as an educator, I love your website. You guys do a great job. I watch your videos to make sure I'm staying on top of things too. So major kudos to how you guys, even the colors are nice. It's just so pleasing to be on your website. So I want to make sure you share that with your team, please.
Thank you so much. I will definitely do that. And it's great to hear because we are really focused on education. One of the hardest parts for us has been explaining how we fit into what is already a pretty complicated landscape of companies, organizations that serve creators. And so we found that by describing that bigger picture, it made it easier for us to explain what we do. And again, right, the more that people know, the more likely they are to get paid by all the organizations that are there to pay them. So we view that as a win-win. If we can help you discover that you need to be paid by Sound Exchange on the sound recording side and the MLC, then that's great for you, and it's great for us, and it's great for Sound Exchange.
So there is a great deal of information on your website that people can go to and learn a lot about what so I want to ask you a couple questions that are not on your website. And if you want to give a little bit of back information about the Harry Fox, you can. But my question is there a possibility that the Harry Fox Agency and the MLC will become one organization?
No, we do get a lot of questions about HFA. As you no doubt know, HFA was one of the organizations that administered digital audio royalties for digital services before the blanket license became effective. Music Reports, or MRI, is another company that did that. We hired HFA to be a vendor of ours, so they are one of a number of companies that help us do the things that we do. But HFA remains a separate standalone company, and like MRI, they administer a host of other rights that the MLC can't administer. So, and I have no reason to believe that they're not going to continue to operate both HFA and MRI. So, what we like to tell people is, if you are getting paid by MRI or HFA, that is likely because they are administering other rights that you have and paying you other royalties that you deserve. So keep that connection with them and add a connection to the MLC. The MLC ultimately didn't replace any organization entirely. We simply took the role of administrating this particular set of royalties and centralized it. But there are lots of other ways you can get paid. And again, you want to get paid in all of those ways. And HFA and MRI are two companies that might be paying you those other rights and royalties.
And so since we are talking about the payment, I don't know, and you can, clarify this, does the MLC pay quarterly, bi-monthly? Like, when do the payments come out, and how? And I don't know what kind of system you guys are using, but the other end of my question is do you foresee you guys utilizing blockchain technology to issue payments?
So the first question is easy. We account monthly. So every month around the 14th or 15th, we distribute royalties. The actual date is usually 75 days after the end of the month that we are reporting for the first time. And occasionally, if that distribution day falls on a weekend, we try to accelerate the distribution to day 73 or 4, so that we're not sending money and statements out on a weekend. We don't want them to get lost in your inbox. So every month, like clockwork. And as I said earlier in the program, we have done every distribution since we started last April, on time or early. In terms of blockchain, we do not use blockchain today, and we don't have any immediate plans to adopt blockchain. Blockchain is a very interesting technology, but the uses of blockchain are not necessarily the uses that would be most relevant to what we do. To put it another way, because we have essentially now become a centralized hub to which all the digital services provide their reporting and their royalties, and then from which we pay every rights holder. Everything comes through that single connection. Blockchain is often a better approach, where you have a series of connections and you want to track them. So the best example I've ever heard, and it's one that I find both interesting and personally relevant, some of the big retailers like Walmart apparently use blockchain to track the origin of food products like lettuce. So by getting everybody in the supply chain to use their blockchain, they can trace a head of lettuce back to a farm or a field on a farm. And if, God forbid, there was an issue where there was something in the lettuce that made people sick, they can immediately isolate where that came from, and in that way only destroy or take out of the market the lettuce from that field and that farm where the issue arose, right? So that's a use case that makes sense. But for us, because we've centralized things, the benefits of blockchain, at least today, are not apparent, because we have that direct connection with the services on the one end and the rights holders on the other. And quite frankly, we're able to make those connections and then pay those things out, pay those royalties out every month. So it's not like it's taking a lot of time. I do think there are interesting potential use cases for blockchain if you think about the creation of a sound recording and then all the steps it takes along the way. But the problem is, to make that work, everyone in the supply chain would have to use the same platform, or the platforms have to be interoperable. So your Jamvana as a distributor would have to be on the same blockchain that the digital services were on and the record companies were on, and then they'd have to use that to report to us, and then we'd have to report to rights holders. But that would require a level of coordination in every part of the industry that is hard to imagine today. And again, that's the trick with blockchain, is it works if everybody involved says we're going to use it. But music industry is not an industry that I think would lend itself to that level of coordination, at least not today. I see Monique is laughing, and right, that's the good and the bad in the music industry. We're pretty decentralized, and one of the hallmarks of our industry is independent music, right? There are millions of independent creators, independent writers, and we give them all access to the market through dozens of distributors. So that's a positive in our industry. And at the same time, that makes it challenging to adopt these sorts of platform solutions because you have to get all those people to sign on, at least today. But we constantly monitor what's happening in the world. We're very interested in what's happening in that space. And if ever we think that could help us do our job more effectively, we are absolutely open to it. Today, we don't see that opportunity, and so we are not using it today.
Is there anything that you can think of that you would like people to know about the MLC?
I can think of 2 or 3 things. We covered one already, and that is the data is so important. So when you're making music, whether you're writing or you're recording, just know that the data is the most important thing to ensuring that you get paid and credited properly. So please pay attention to your data. Please register your works with us. Please include all the metadata you can when you put your sound recordings up on the services through Jamvana or anyone else. Second thing I would say is all of this is confusing. It's not easy, and we know that. One of the amazing things about music is that every single one of us alive at some point has been a musician, and that's because when we were little kids, we all learned how to sing, and we all took spoons or toys and we banged them on something, right? And that act of banging your toy on the table was making music. So we all intuitively know how to make music, but none of us intuitively know how to manage the copyright system in the United States or any other country. So there's a lot to learn, and organizations like the MLC are really trying hard to help provide you with the information you need to learn how this works. So go to our website, follow us on social media, take advantage of all the information we put out there. That would be my second piece of advice. My third piece of advice is if you need someone to help you, know that we've got a really great support team, and we offer one-on-one support via phone, email, and chat once you become a member. And we're there to answer any questions you have. There are no silly or stupid questions. And we do that 12 hours a day, 5 days a week. Our support team, since we launched that team in October of 2020, has fielded more than 35,000 support connections. So that means we've had 35,000 conversations or exchanges via email or chats in our portal with members to answer individual questions. So if you have a question, reach out to us and we will try to answer it one-on-one. And I think those 3 things: know the importance of your data, make sure you take advantage of all the opportunities like this podcast to learn as much as you can about the business that you are now a part of, and then ask questions. Those would be the 3 pieces of advice I would leave your listeners with.
And my last question in closing would just be with regard to something you mentioned at the very beginning, which is the MLC is only collecting mechanicals for the US. So who is collecting our mechanicals outside of the US?
Great question. There are organizations around the world like us that collect royalties for creators, all different types of royalties. You can affiliate with them. There are also companies that you can sign up with that will collect your royalties on your behalf, and they'll do that at a pretty reasonable fee. So again, if you are making music and you elect to have your sound recordings available outside the US, know that now means that you may be earning money from someone outside the US, and you need to look into which partners are out there that can help you. There are many, and too many for me to mention now, but there are a lot of good companies out there that can help you. And they may also be companies that can help collect your MLC royalties too. So while we are thrilled to have anyone join the MLC directly, and that includes songwriters anywhere in the world, you can be a songwriter in France, in Japan, in South Africa. And if you wrote a song that was recorded and released on Spotify in the US, you're entitled to mechanical royalties. We will pay you just like we pay any songwriter based in the US. So you can be a member regardless of where you are in the world, but you can also affiliate with an organization that will collect the mechanicals from us for you and from those other organizations around the world. And there is no shame in that. Um, as a musician, what I like to tell creators is ultimately the biggest challenge that you have is managing your time. And that's true for all of us. So you have to decide, do you want to spend 5 or 10 hours a month managing your data and making sure you're affiliated with all the organizations that might have money for you? Or do you want to pay someone to do that for you? There's no right answer, right? But it's like mowing the lawn. When I was a kid, I mowed the lawn every day. I don't mow the lawn anymore, and it's not because I can't do it. It's because I'd rather spend that 2 hours on the weekend with my kids and my family than sitting on a lawnmower. And that's a choice, right? So at different points in your life, you'll say, "Hey, I'm good. I want to do this all. I want to understand it." Great, join the MLC. But you may get to the point where you're like, "I don't want to do this. I don't like it. I'd rather spend that 5 hours writing more songs." And then it's totally fine to hire a partner. So the good news is you can choose the way you set up your business. We'll work with you regardless of how you do it. But the key is make a choice. Don't leave that money out there. Don't leave it uncollected. So hopefully that will encourage you to connect to collect either with us or with a great partner who connects for you. And either way, we'll get you paid.
Awesome. And you can put your son on the lawnmower for a few hours. That's
Soon, in a couple of years, they'll be able to do it.
I heard that's why people have children, to do the chores. I'm just teasing.
They're backup for the songs. If the songs don't take care of you, hopefully the children will.
Well, that's all my questions. I kind of hogged the whole interview today, but I was geeking out about this interview, so I'm super excited. Rob, Lennon, any closing questions?
I have one kind of final question that goes back, but no, Mo, I know she has been talking about this episode for weeks. When I said that I was going to try to get Kris on the show, she was very excited. So I kind of let her take the reign, and this is information that she's going to dispel to her students, which are the future of the music industry. So it is vital that she got in and asked her questions. But kind of going back, and Monique is one. She was probably my favorite instructor at Full Sail. So I love Monique. So going back just a little bit, you talked about blockchain and all that. So I'm wondering, does the MLC function as kind of a private entity, or are you kind of limited in the innovation that you're able to do because of how the law is structured? Are you bound by what the law says you can and can't do?
Yes. So, in terms of the scope of our activities, we are limited today to administering the blanket license that covers digital audio uses in the US. If the law changed in the future and expanded the scope of what we could do, we could obviously do more. Though certainly the task in front of us has been massive. So I'm not pushing for that to expand. We have lots of work still left to do. But in terms of innovation, there's nothing that prevents us from doing things in more innovative ways. And in fact, that's exactly what we set out to do. So there are lots of things that we've already done that have changed the way that this part of the business works. One of the biggest innovations was simply making all the data that we manage available for anyone to search. So if you go to our website and you click on the public search button, it's the yellow button on the top left, top right side of the screen, you will then be taken to a search screen where you can search the ownership information in our database for any song, any one of the 27 million songs in our database. As a member, you can obviously use that search, but you can also then search the unmatched data, so all the uses of sound recordings that we have not matched, and you can actually propose matches of those unmatched uses to songs you've written. So if you wrote a song, you can do a search for the sound recording of that song, and if you see that we haven't made that connection, you can literally suggest that connection to us. That's an innovation. Just last week, we added an export button. So every member of the MLC can now export all of the data for the works in their catalog, all the data for the songs they've registered with us on demand to Excel in one of two Excel formats or a CSV format. So you have now access to all of the data we have for your songs on demand whenever you want it with the press of a button. That's another innovation. So we're going to keep looking for ways to make the process easier and easier, to make it more transparent. and there's no limit on what we can do to do that. And that's one of the exciting parts of our job. Everyone at the MLC is passionate about making sure that people are paid properly, but we're really passionate about doing that in better and better ways. And for as long as the MLC exists, that's our mission. So even now, we've already begun to update the portal, make it more user friendly. That catalog export function was something which added, the matching tool we added last October. And we're going to continue to build and roll out new tools, new screens, new ways to manage your data that make it easier and easier. And all that innovation, again, is free to all of our members.
That's great. I love hearing that. Yeah, that's kind of all the questions that I have. So or Rob, do you have any final questions here before we wrap things up?
I'm gonna see if Rob has anything because he's been so
I'm just,
attentive the whole time.
I'm collecting all the knowledge. I love it. No, this is very helpful. I think it's great for our users. And Kris, we do appreciate you joining. I have questions on the next one. Okay.
Well, that's great, and I hope that I can come back because I'd love to talk to you guys again. This has been fantastic. We covered so much ground, and yeah, I'd love to come back in 3 or 6 months and let you know how things are going, give you an update, and ask or answer even more questions.
Absolutely.
I have one short question. I promise it's a little
Yes.
tiny one, and Kris, this is kind of like just I don't know, just your perspective on this. Are you surprised? I mean, creative people aren't usually excuse me, creative people aren't usually that quick to jump onto these new things when they're presented to them when it comes to the business side of the music industry. Are you surprised at how quickly songwriters came to the MLC to enter their information? I know I am. I'm
Yes.
surprised.
Yes, incredibly grateful is really a better word because again, this is not why creative people get into the business, and yet it's such an important part of the business. So we're thrilled that we've seen the engagement that we have to date. We have more than 20,000 members now. We've added 13,000 since we started in January. So the way we think about that is, most of the members that we had right out of the gate were publishers because they knew they had to do this, and this is one of their primary responsibilities. But the majority, if not all of the 13 plus thousand we've added, are all self-administered, self-published published songwriters. And I think there are many more still that we have to connect with. So we're thrilled and we're grateful, and we know there's still more to come. And what I hope we've been able to do is help creators see not only how they need to connect with us to get paid, but more broadly, that we've given them some increased level of confidence that they can understand the business and understand all the ways they're supposed to get paid. And if we can get to the point where every creator understands how to get paid, what to do, and if all the organizations out there responsible for paying people are constantly striving to make it easier and easier for them to get paid, we'll have a much better music business in the future. And that's certainly what we hope. So we're thrilled to be a part of that, and hope that we're making it all a little better for everyone.
Yay! Thank you. All right.
Thank you guys again. It was wonderful to be here, and I hope to come back again soon.
Yes, we'll definitely have you back. You're such a wealth of information
Yeah.
and such a pleasure to speak to. So we'll definitely have you back when we'll build up some more questions for you and we'll reach back out and reconnect.